Hey everyone, so I thought I would do a little series about aspect patterns in the natal charts. And first I'm going to talk about T-squares. So when you have a T-square in your natal chart, what you have is two planets or points that are in opposition of each other. So they're kind of battling against each other, where you tend to slingshot from one energy to the other on a regular basis. And it's difficult to kind of find a balance between the two. And with a T-square, those two opposition points are squaring a third point, creating like a triangle in your natal chart. So what happens with these T-squares is the tension between your oppositions tends to get funneled into that point of the triangle, which is called the focal point. And you end up kind of overstressing that point in your life. You lean into it a little too much. You might kind of hide in it to avoid the tension of the opposition, which eventually over time kind of overstresses it to the point where there's like an explosion of energy where everything just funnels back and you slingshot between the oppositions. So we'll talk about in my chart, I have a Mars ascendant conjunction in opposition to a Moon descendant conjunction, and they are both squaring a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in my ninth house in Libra. So what ends up happening here is my emotions are buried so deeply because it's in conjunction with my descendant, and it's in Cancer. So they're like there's this need to like nurture people and be extra loving and empathetic and everything, but that energy is buried so deeply that I have a difficult time accessing it. So when I try to access it, a lot of times I'll slingshot over to that Mars ascendant conjunction that's in Capricorn, and Mars on the ascendant can actually be like an explosive temper, a short temper, but it's also like a drive, like you really just kind of approach everything with this need to go and start things. And being in Capricorn, there is a little bit of structure to it, so it does kind of calm it a little more. But there's just this constant slingshot between, and quite honestly, I say this is where my bipolar disorder lies, the depression of those emotions that are deeply hidden and the kind of manicness of a Mars ascendant conjunction. But what happens is when I start feeling this tug between the two, all of that energy funnels into that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in my ninth house. And I end up burying myself in learning and spirituality. I will sit and watch stuff on the Travel Channel for days on end. I will read books forever. I will do anything to avoid the confrontation of the opposition. But after a while, I've overthought everything. I've overstudied everything. I've done everything I can to try to distract myself, and eventually it all just kind of blows up and it'll go one way or the other, either into a depression or into a manic state. So there's a couple different ideas on how to combat this energy. So with the T-square, it's very difficult in that it's a lot of tension. You kind of tend to live life in a constant state of crisis. A lot of times it's stuff that's out of your control even that triggers this. Transits will trigger it. But if you learn how to work with it, it's actually a pattern that can lead to great success if you can get through it. And some of the theories on how to get through this is the most popular one is to look at the opposite area of your chart from that focal point, from the point of the triangle. Now, for me, that would be Aries in my third house. Of course, there's no placement there. If there was, it would be a grand cross. But Aries in the third house is taking action with communication, which is basically what I'm doing here, right? And I'm taking all these things that I'm learning through that focal point, and I'm communicating it. So that in theory, is one of the most popular ideas of how to deal with the T-square in your natal chart. I also happen to have Pallas Athena retrograde in Aries in my third house. And what Pallas Athena does, among a lot of things, she's kind of a badass, but one thing that she does is she recognizes patterns. In third house, she recognizes communication patterns through speech, through written communication and things like that. And she bridges a gap between your rational thought and your intuition. So I have learned that if I trust what she's telling me, that, when I read something or I hear somebody say something and I get this sudden, aha moment or light bulb go off, it's that if I trust that it will relieve the tension from that T-square. The other theory that I've seen on this is to look and see if that focal point makes a trine or a sextile to anything. So a trine would be kind of a talent that you don't know you have. It's a place of ease. It's where things just kind of go easy for you. A sextile would be more a talent that you're aware that you have and that you're actually able to work with. You're actually able to access it and do something with it. Now in my chart, my focal point is sextile my sun in my 11th house in Sagittarius. So this is kind of taking this knowledge that I learn through this focal point and showing it, kind of not making my identity about it, but letting it be seen within me, not hiding the knowledge. It's also about being in the 11th house. This is within social situations, social groups. Speak up when I know something. This is part of breaking that. Rather than keeping it all in my head, I let it out and actually speak to people about these things. Being a Sagittarius also is this optimistic nature. It's kind of the go with the flow nature as well. So leaning into that energy and using that energy to relieve the stress of this focal point can help to dissipate that explosion that happens when the focal point gets overstressed. There's another idea, and this one is my own. It's just something I kind of thought of one day that I haven't really seen spoken about anywhere, but it made sense. So when you have a square in your natal chart, one of the best ways to kind of break through the restrictions that a square creates is to look at the midpoint of those two planets. Now, obviously, you're going to have two midpoints to look at on this one. For me, that would be the cusp of my 11th house in Scorpio. So this would be taking the information that I'm learning through the focal point and releasing it into Scorpio type of energy of spirituality, transformation. You could also kind of look at it as like the dark stuff, the deep stuff, really like getting into really deep topics. But being on the cusp of my 11th house, it kind of combines both career life and social life. So taking that energy and putting it there in the career and social life helps to relieve the tension on the focal point. And then also the other square that I have, the other midpoint, is actually my North Node and Vertex conjunction in Leo in my 8th house. Again, Scorpio energy, because Scorpio rules the 8th house. So we're still looking at the same type of subjects, but this time it's in Leo. So this is also, standing up and being seen, being heard, claiming your individuality, and really being acknowledged for things. So really, no matter which way I go on these different ways to release the tension from the focal point, it's all about communicating what I know, communicating what I learn, being seen in that. And there is a spirituality aspect to it. with Sagittarius is also a spiritual sign, and Scorpio being such a deeply spiritual sign, there's really a whole idea of being public with my spirituality and the knowledge surrounding it in order to break through that T-square that's always giving me roadblocks, always knocking me back down. So anytime that you might have a T-square in your natal chart, really look at these placements surrounding it. I know it's really difficult to force yourself to do it, but you gotta. It's really the only way to kind of break the pattern of it and look at what's opposite the focal point, what are the midpoints of the squares, and does that focal point make any trines or sextiles? And this is where your breakthrough points are to really stop this cycle of that T-square and turn it from frustration into success. I hope this helps you guys. If you want to get a reading on your personal natal chart, you can check out the link. I'll put it in the description box, and make sure you hit subscribe.